The market was alive with noise, buzzing with traders shouting prices. And creatures from every corner of the galaxy. But in the back corner, hidden between piles of junk and rusted tools, sat a small alien girl. She was thin, her skin pale, purple and bruised, with messy white hair falling over her dull silver eyes. Her clothes were ripped and stained, barely hanging on her fragile body. She didn't cry, she didn't beg, she just sat there. Tied to a metal post, no one even looked. At her, she was like trash, forgotten, broken, worthless, not worth a cracked wrench. One vendor laughed as he passed by. "She's been through 10 owners. Nobody could make her obey," said another. "Last one left her behind when his ship blew," someone muttered, and the girl just sat still, as if none of the words reached her ears. Then came a man, not loud like the others, not dressed in bright robes or armor. He was human Elias, tall, with short black hair and a tired face. He looked like someone who had seen too many battles, lost too many friends. He walked past the vendors until he stopped in front of the girl. For a moment, he said nothing. He just stared at her. Her face was calm, but her eyes were full of pain that hadn't been there for a day or a week. This was pain buried. Deep pain that had no words anymore. "How much for her?" Elias asked quietly. The junk seller laughed. A dry sound. "You want that? Take her. I'll pay you to get her off my lot." "No, seriously," Elias said. "What's the price?" "Nothing. 0. Free." The seller grinned. "Just don't bring her back." Elias looked at the girl again. She didn't move, didn't react. She probably thought this was another handoff, another cruel master. He crouched down, spoke gently. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said. "I just don't want to leave you here." Still, she didn't speak. But something in her eyes shifted just a little. He unchained her wrist, slow and careful. She stood on weak legs, ready to follow him, because that's what she had been trained to do. Obey, stay quiet, survive. Elias walked her through the crowded market. Whispers followed them. "She's cursed. She bites, poor man, wasting time." But Elias ignored every voice. To him, she wasn't a tool, a slave, or a problem. She was a girl who had been abandoned, and that wasn't right. When they reached his small ship, she stopped at the entrance. "Go on," Elias said, opening the door. She hesitated, then stepped in slowly. It was warm inside, dimly lit, with clean floors and a soft hum from the engines. She looked around like it was a dream, more a trap. Elias showed her to a small room. It had a bed, a soft blanket, a table, and a bowl of stew already heating in the corner. He motioned to the food. "Eat, please." She sat down, stared at the bowl. Her hands shook, and tears filled her eyes though. She tried to hide them. She hadn't had real food, and she couldn't even remember when she finally took a bite. She covered her mouth with both hands, as if scared someone would hit her for eating too fast. But Elias just sat nearby and said nothing. After a few minutes, she looked at him. No words. Just a question in her eyes. "Why are you being kind?" Elias didn't answer right away. Instead, he asked, "Do you have a name?" She didn't reply. She finished the stew, wiped her face, and curled up on the floor instead of the bed. That night, Elias watched her sleep from the hallway. He didn't understand what had happened to her, but he knew one thing: no one deserved to be treated like she had. The next morning, something strange happened. She was gone. Not from the ship, but from the room. Elias searched the ship and found her in the cargo bay. She was sitting quietly, cleaning a pile of his old tools with a rag she found. "Why are you doing that?" he asked, surprised. She looked at him, eyes low. "To earn my keep," she whispered for the first time. Her voice was soft, tired, but clear. Elias froze. She wasn't trying to run, wasn't trying to escape. She had been trained to work for kindness, to pay back survival, and in that moment, Elias realized this wasn't just a girl who had been abandoned. This was a soul trained to believe she had no worth, but he would change that, starting now. The girl didn't speak again that day. She finished cleaning Elias's tools, then sat in a corner with her hands in her lap. Elias brought her more food, but she only ate half before pushing it away. He didn't force her. He just smiled gently and said, "You don't have to finish if you're full." She blinked at him like that sentence didn't make sense. Elias could see it. Every small thing confused her: soft lighting, calm voices, food that wasn't rationed or stolen. She flinched when he walked too close. She tensed if he reached out for something. Near her, even the sound of the ship's door opening made her back press to the wall. She had lived too long expecting pain. Elias decided not to ask questions. Not yet. She would talk when she was ready. Until then, he would offer safety, not pressure. That evening, Elias showed her her own room. It was small but clean, with a soft bed, a private washroom, and a small screen on the wall. The girl stepped in slowly, looking around with wide eyes. She touched the bed and pulled her hand back as if expecting it to bite. "You can sleep here," Elias said, standing at the door. "Bathroom is to the left, and the panel can control temperature or call me." She said nothing, but he noticed the way her fingers curled around the blanket like it was treasure. He started to walk away, then paused. "Do you want the door open or closed?" he asked. Her eyes shifted, and after a moment, she whispered, "Closed? Okay." He nodded, pressing the panel and watching the door slide shut. But what she didn't know was that the door locked automatically when closed from inside. Late that night, Elias was reading in his bunk when he heard a sudden bang. Then another, and then a sharp scream, muffled behind metal. He ran down the hallway, heart pounding. When he reached her room, he found her pounding her fists against the door. Tears streamed down her face. Her breathing was rapid. "Open it," she gasped. "Please, I'll be good. I'll be good. Just let me out." Elias opened the door instantly, and she fell forward into his arms. Trembling, he caught her gently. "It's okay. It's okay. You're safe." He whispered again and again, but she didn't stop shaking. She collapsed to her knees, arms around her chest, crying so quietly it hurt to hear. Elias knelt beside her. "I didn't mean to lock you in," he said softly. "It's just the ship's safety system. But I'll change it, I promise." She looked up at him, confusion mixing with fear. "You're not angry?" she asked, her voice barely a breath. "Of course not," Elias said. "Why would I be angry?" She stared at him like the question made no sense. "Because I yelled," she said. "Because I panicked." Elias shook his head slowly. "You're allowed to feel things here," he said. "You don't need permission to be scared." She didn't know how to respond. No one had ever said something like that to her. That night, she didn't return to her room. She sat in the corner of Elias's workshop and didn't sleep at all. The next morning, she had circles under her eyes. But she had cleaned every tool in the room again. Twice, Elias gave her a warm drink and said nothing. He let her sit beside him in silence, just letting her exist without expectations. Later, she touched a datapad and jumped when it powered on. She looked at him quickly. "Ready for punishment? Do you want to learn how to use it?" Elias asked. She blinked, then slowly nodded. He spent the next hour teaching her how to scroll, type, and search. She caught on fast, faster than most new recruits he'd trained before. "You're smart," he told her. She looked down, whispering. "I wasn't allowed to be." Those words stayed with Elias all day. He couldn't imagine being punished for thinking. But she had lived it, and now every compliment felt like a shock to her system. That evening, Elias cooked a meal, real food, not just rations. He placed a chair for her beside his and waited. She stood awkwardly at the edge. Unsure. Sit, he said gently, smiling. You don't have to earn your place at the table. She sat slowly, hands on her lap. He passed her a plate, and they ate in silence, halfway through. She paused and asked, "Why are you doing this?" Elias looked at her, meeting her eyes. "Because you deserve to be treated like a person," he said. She didn't answer right away, but when she finished, she said softly, "Thank you." The words sounded strange on her tongue, like she hadn't said them in years. But she meant them, deeply, that night when he walked her back to her room. She stopped at the doorway. "You can leave the door open," she whispered. Elias nodded, and when he turned to leave, he heard her voice again, quiet and unsure. "My name is Laura," she said. Elias smiled. "Nice to meet you, Laura," he replied. And that was the first time her name had been spoken with kindness. Laura stood at the window of the ship, staring at the stars. She hadn't asked where they were going. She didn't care about the names of planets or sectors. All that mattered was that she wasn't in a cage anymore. Elias watched her quietly. From behind, she looked stronger now, a little less scared, but he knew healing wasn't quick. Not for someone who had been treated like she didn't matter. She still moved carefully, still checked doors twice before entering, still paused when anyone raised their voice over comes. But she had started eating full meals. She had stopped sitting on the floor one evening. Elias gave her a tablet filled with stories from Earth, children's stories, history books, space. "Logs, read what you like," he said. She touched the screen gently, like it was something sacred. Hours later, she came to him, holding the tablet to her chest. "These stories. They're not just about humans," she said. "They're about people trying to be better." Elias nodded. "That's what we aim for," he replied. Laura sat with him every night after that. Sometimes she asked questions. Other times she just listened as he told stories about Earth up, oceans, trees, and snow. She couldn't imagine cold weather. She had lived her whole life in steel cells and desert colonies. But one night, while staring at a picture of a snowy forest, she whispered, "Can we go there someday?" Elias looked at her and smiled. "Yeah, we can," he said, "one day." But peace never lasts long in the galaxy, especially not for someone like Laura. One afternoon, while they docked at a neutral trade station, Laura walked beside Elias into a tech market. She was wearing clean clothes, a soft jacket, and a small band on her wrist with her ID code. To most, she looked like a quiet assistant or a young crewmate. But to one person, she was something else entirely. A tall alien in royal robes stood across the room, blue skin, sharp eyes, and a golden mark on his forehead. When his gaze locked onto Laura, she froze, her body stiffened. Her hand gripped Elias's sleeve tightly. He looked at her and saw her eyes widen in panic. "Laura?" he asked softly. "That man," she said, barely breathing. "I know him." Elias placed himself between them, but the tall alien walked forward, smiling like a hunter spotting prey. "You've taken something that doesn't belong to you," he said. Elias stayed calm. "She's not a thing," he replied. "She's under my protection." The alien's smile grew sharper. "That girl has a royal mark under her hair, at the base of her neck," he said. "She was born into a noble house, stolen as an infant, and if returned, she would bring a great reward." Laura's hand reached behind her head slowly. She touched the spot he spoke of and her fingers found something she'd never noticed. A scar, a mark, buried under her skin. She looked at Elias, confused and scared. "Is it true?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he said, "It doesn't matter what mark you have. Laura, you're still free, but the noble wasn't done. I could have you arrested for trafficking a royal heir," he said coldly. "You stole her." "No," Elias said firmly. "I rescued her." They left the station quickly, back on the ship. Laura sat in silence for hours. She kept touching the scar behind her neck, like she was trying to erase it. I don't want to be royalty, she said. Finally, I don't want to go back to them. You won't. Elias promised, not unless you want to. But if I'm valuable, she said, voice trembling, does that mean I wasn't nothing? Elias turned toward her, kneeling so their eyes were level. You were never nothing, he said. Even before I knew about the mark, even before you spoke your name, you mattered. Tears filled her eyes. Not from sadness, but from something unfamiliar. Hope. From that day forward, something shifted in Laura. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was beginning to live. She helped Elias chart new routes. She repaired parts of the engine herself. She even laughed once, just once, but it echoed in the ship like a bell. Elias didn't mention it, but he smiled quietly. She still had nightmares. Still woke up breathing fast and clutching her blanket. But she always found Elias sitting in the cockpit, and every time he would say, "It's okay, I'm here." She believed him now, not because he said the words, but because he proved them every single day. Laura was no longer just the girl who had been sold for nothing. She was a navigator, a survivor, and someone who had value far beyond any scar or title. And soon she would face a choice. Not because someone else demanded it, but because she finally had the power to decide for herself. The ship drifted near a trade ring above the blue-gray moon of Araxis. Elias needed fuel and supplies, and Laura had asked to come along. She felt stronger now, steadier on her feet. She even wore a simple jacket with a patch that read crew. Elias noticed how she walked differently now. Not like someone afraid of being hit, but like someone learning to stand tall again. He didn't rush her, didn't pressure her. He just walked beside her like a quiet shield. The station was calm. Mostly humans and traders from neutral systems. Laura stayed close, but her eyes scanned the crowd with quiet curiosity. Her hands no longer trembled, but they still twitched when someone stared too long. They bought ration packs, coolant, spare bolts for the stabilizer. Elias let her carry the handheld scanner. She enjoyed it more than she'd admit, beeping each item and nodding with purpose. Everything seemed peaceful until they passed a shop full of relics, and a voice stopped Laura in her tracks. "I know that girl," it said low and sharp, like a blade slipping from a sheath. Elias turned instantly. Placing himself in front of her, the speaker was tall, gray-skinned, dressed in diplomatic armor with red symbols glowing faintly on the chest. A high-caste alien, clearly from an old and powerful family. He stared at Laura with cold, golden eyes. "That mark under her neck doesn't lie," he said. "She belongs to House Kirellin, and she's stolen property." Laura took a step back. Elias saw the fear flash through her. Then something new on Gore. "I'm not property," she whispered. The man stepped closer, ignoring her words. "You were hidden from the bloodlines. Sold by mistake in the chaos of the rebellion. We searched for years. But now you've been found." Elias raised his hand. "You need to back away," he warned. "She's under my protection." The man sneered. "You, a human protecting royalty you don't understand. You don't know what she is. I know what she's not." Elias said calmly. "She's not yours." The crowd was beginning to stare. The merchant behind the counter slipped into the back. No one wanted to get involved when politics and bloodlines clashed. "She carries royal genes," the man said. "Her DNA is locked to our family vaults, our weapon systems. She's the key to an empire." Laura's hands clenched at her sides. "I don't want your empire," she said clearly. "I don't want your name." The man growled low. "You will return with me," he snapped. "Or I'll file charges for theft and interference." "Then do it," Elias said. "But you'll answer to human diplomatic land." "She'll speak for herself." The man hesitated, clearly not expecting resistance, especially not from a human freighter captain. "You think this ends here?" The man hissed. "You're both already dead." He turned and stormed away. His cloak whipping behind him, Laura let out a shaky breath and leaned against a crate. Her legs were trembling again, but she didn't fall. "You okay?" Elias asked softly. She nodded once. "I remembered his face," she said. "He was there." When I was taken, Elias didn't press her. He just stood beside her in silence, letting her control the moment. When they returned to the ship, Laura locked herself in her room, but this time, it wasn't fear it was thinking, remembering hours. Past, Elias left a cup of tea outside her door and went to the cockpit. He didn't expect her to come out, but she did, just before the ship jumped to the next sector. Her face was pale, but her eyes were steady. She sat across from him and said, "I remember my mother." Elias stayed silent. "I was small, maybe 3 cycles old," Laura continued. "There was an explosion, and she put me in a metal crate. She told me to stay quiet no matter what. I thought she'd come back," she whispered. "But someone else opened the crate, not her. Then I was sold, again and again, until I forgot everything except pain. But now I remember her voice," she said. "And I remember she loved me." Elias leaned forward. "You don't have to find them." He said, "You don't owe them anything." "I know," Laura said. "But if that man finds me again, I want to face him without shaking." Elias gave a small smile. "Then we'll prepare for that," he said, "together." She looked down at her hands. "Do you think? People can choose who they want to be, even if they were raised to believe they were nothing." Elias nodded slowly. "I think that's the only choice that really matters." Laura didn't say anything more, but as she walked back to her room, she didn't shut the door, she left it open. Just a little, a quiet sign that the past no longer owned her. And far away, across the stars, the house that had once lost her was preparing to take her back by force, if needed. The galaxy never stayed quiet for long. Elias's ship had just left orbit when the warning lights flashed red. A tracker was on their hull small, hidden but active. He cursed under his breath and turned to Laura. "They're following us," he said. Laura didn't flinch. She had expected it. "He won't stop," she said softly. "He wants control, not family." Elias pulled the tracker out with a robotic arm and smashed it. But they both knew more were coming. "You said you wanted to face him without shaking." Elias reminded her, "Now's the time to get stronger." Laura didn't hesitate. "Teach me," she said. From that moment, her training began. Elias wasn't a soldier anymore, but he had once been. He showed her how to fight. Not like a warrior, but like someone who needed to survive. Hand-to-hand knife, defense, pressure points, Laura learned fast. Each lesson gave her a little more confidence. Each bruise reminded her that pain could come from growth, not just cruelty. Elias taught her how to speak in firm tones, how to look someone in the eye without backing down, and how to hold a blaster not for war, but for protection. Some nights she cried alone in her bunk. Not from fear, but from the heavy truth she was facing all her life. She had been told she was weak. Now she was unlearning every lie. They stopped at a moon station for fuel. Laura walked beside Elias, not behind him. A few traders glanced at her. But she didn't lower her gaze. She scanned cargo herself, asked questions, and even joked once. Elias smiled, but said nothing. He knew she didn't need praise every time she needed to feel her own progress. But the enemy was getting closer. One day, a message arrived, encrypted and sharp. Elias played it on the screen. The man from before appeared, his voice cold and clear. "You're hiding a royal asset," he said. "Return her to House Corellan, and you will be compensated. If not, we'll take her by force." Elias deleted the message, then looked at Laura. Her eyes were calm. "No more running," she said. So they prepared. They flew to a neutral asteroid field known as Black Hollow. It had caves, shadows, and natural interference that blocked scans. Elias taught Lura how to set traps and hide energy signals. They didn't plan to win a war, they planned to survive one. 2 days later, the ship arrived, sleek, dark, with a royal symbol glowing red on the front. Lura watched it from a cliff above the hollow. Her heart was pounding, but her hands were steady. The crew of the enemy ship spread out, searching with scanners and weapons. Elias and Lura split up. Moving silently through the rocky terrain, when one soldier came close, Lura acted. She dropped from a ledge, kicked the blaster from his hand, and knocked him out cold. Fast, clean, and without hesitation, Elias took down 2 more, disabling their coms and leaving them tied. The real challenge came when the commander arrived, the man in the red-inked armor. The same one who had called her property, Lura, stepped out to face him, alone. He stared at her with cruel amusement, back to be civilized. He sneered. "No," she replied. "I came to show you what freedom looks like." He raised his blaster. She didn't flinch. Instead, she threw a flash bomb, Elias's invention, and rolled into cover. The light blinded the guards. Then Elias appeared behind them, taking their weapons one by one. It wasn't a perfect battle. Elias got a deep cut on his arm. Lura twisted her ankle, dodging a stun blast, but in the end, he stood tall while the enemy ship powered down. The commander sat on his knees, bound and defeated. Lura looked at him one last time. "You don't own me," she said. "You never did." He spat at the ground. "You're still one of us, no matter what you say." "No," she whispered. "I choose who I am now." Elias activated the distress beacon from the royal ship. Let their own house come collect their failure. Lura and Elias flew off into the stars, the hollow fading behind them. In the medbay, Elias stitched his arm. Lura sat beside him with ice on her ankle. "You didn't freeze," he said. "No," she replied. "I fought." He smiled faintly. "And next time?" "I won't limp," she said with a smirk. They both laughed for the first time in days. Because now, the real war was over, and something new was beginning. Lura was no longer a girl with no name, no longer a tool sold for nothing. She was someone who had faced her past and refused to be owned by it. The stars drifted slowly outside the ship's window. Lura sat beside Elias, watching the quiet glow. Her ankle had healed, and the bruises on her body were almost gone. But the weight in her chest was heavier than ever. She had fought. She had won. But peace wasn't easy when the galaxy still whispered her name with royal weight. The message came through a few days later. A transmission not from the commander they'd defeated, but from the Royal Council of House Caroline itself. Elias opened the message carefully. The seal was golden and pulsing with recognition, code meaning they knew exactly where she was. The screen flickered, and a hologram appeared. An alien woman, dressed in ceremonial robes with long silver hair and the same pale violet eyes as Lura. The woman spoke softly. "Lura," she said, "daughter of House Caroline, you were lost, stolen in war, forgotten by fate. But now we know you live, and we ask for your return." Lura froze. She looked just like the woman. There was no denying the connection. Elias paused the message. "You don't have to do anything," he said. "Just say the word and we'll disappear again." But Lura shook her head slowly. "I want to hear the rest," she whispered. The message continued. "If you come back willingly, you will be honored," the woman said. "The throne has no heir, and you are the last of our line. Everything we have, our name, our ships, our voice will belong to you." Lura stared at the frozen image after the message ended. She didn't speak for a long time. When she finally did, her voice was quiet. "They want me not because they missed me," she said, "but because they need me." Elias nodded. "I think so too," he replied. "But the choice is still yours." Lura stood and walked slowly to the viewport. She remembered sleeping on cold metal, eating spoiled food, being kicked, ignored, sold like trash. And now, the people who let that happen were asking her to wear a crown. She didn't sleep that night. She sat at the ship's table with old datapads spread out, reading about her house, their history, the wars they caused, the peace they promised, and the people they stepped on to build their empire. When morning came, Elias found her still there, dark circles under her eyes, but fire in her voice. "I'll go," she said, "but not to join them. I'm going to tell them what I really am." Elias blinked, and, "What's that?" Laura looked up and said, "Free." They landed at the floating city of Valar, capital of the royal house. 2 armored escorts met them as they stepped off the ship. Laura held her head high. She didn't wear robes or crowns. She wore her crew jacket, the one Elias had given her. Crowds gathered as she entered the central court. Gasps and whispers followed her. Some bowed, some sneered, but she kept walking. The royal hall was bright and tall, with crystal towers above and silk banners flowing on both sides. At the end sat the council, their faces curious, cold, and old. And in the center was the woman from the message. She stood, stepping forward. "Laura," she said with emotion in her voice. "My daughter," but Laura held up her hand. "I'm not your daughter," she said calmly. "I'm not anyone's property. You lost me once. And now you want to use me because your bloodline is fading." The hall grew still. One council member whispered, "She has fire." Another muttered, "She must be trained." Laura looked them all in the eye. "I won't sit on your throne." She said, "I won't wear your name. I came here to say this out loud in front of every witness so no one ever claims me again." The woman looked hurt, but she nodded slowly. "Then, what will you do?" Laura turned to Elias, then back to the council. "I'll leave with the one person who saw me when no one else did. I'll build my life not on power, but on choice. You can keep your empire," she said. "I've found something better." There was silence for a long time. Then the head counselor spoke. "By law, she is free," he announced. "No claim can be made." The hall broke into murmurs, some shocked, others angry. But Laura didn't care. She had said what needed to be said, and now she was walking away from her past with her head high. Back on the ship, Elias handed her a cup of tea. "You sure?" He asked. Laura sipped and smiled. "I didn't walk away," she said. "I walked forward." For the first time, her voice didn't shake, and for the first time, her future was truly hers. The stars stretched across the dark like silver threads. Elias's ship floated in quiet space, far from royal planets and enemy beacons. Laura sat in the co-pilot seat, staring at the controls. She knew what every button did now. What once looked like chaos now felt like home. Weeks had passed since she stood in front of the Royal Council. Since she spoke her truth without shaking, the galaxy had heard. Some had called her brave. Some had called her foolish, but she didn't care anymore. Laura had found peace in something greater than bloodlines or power. She had found peace in choice, in Elias, in herself, coordinates set. She said with a soft smile. Elias glanced over from the pilot chair. "Want to take us in?" She nodded, placing her hands on the controls like a natural. He watched her with quiet pride. They were heading to a small colony world green, quiet, and far from war. It wasn't a mission. It wasn't a job. It was a visit. Elias had mentioned once that he owned a little land there, somewhere to disappear if needed. But now, it wasn't for hiding, it was for planting something new. As they landed, wind brushed over the grasslands. The air was clean, filled with the scent of soil and wildflowers. Laura stepped out and felt the breeze touch her face. She closed her eyes and smiled. This was her first time standing on a world that didn't feel like a cage. Elias unpacked a crate and handed her a small metal tool. "What's this for?" she asked. He pointed to the ground. "Dig," he said simply. "Together." They dug small patches of soil. Then Elias opened a jar of seeds from earths, carrots, onions, even tomatoes. "Never thought I'd plant these with a royal rebel," he joked. Laura laughed. "You're lucky," she said. "Most rebels don't cook. They worked in silence. Not the awkward kind, but the peaceful kind. The kind of silence where two people didn't need to explain anything. They just understood." Later that evening, a message came through. It was from the council, not a demand, but a request. They asked if Laura would consider being a speaker. Not a ruler, not an heir, just a voice for the forgotten. Elias read it and looked at her. Laura stared at the message for a long moment, then shook her head. "I already speak," she said. "I don't need their platform." He didn't argue. He just nodded and deleted the message. Some choices didn't need to be explained. They only needed to be lived. A few days later, Elias found her outside the ship, sitting on a flat stone. She had built a small marker stones, stacked carefully, with a cloth tied to the top. "What's that?" he asked. "A memory," she replied. "For the girl I used to be." He sat beside her quietly. "I don't hate her," Laura whispered. She was scared, broken, silent, but she kept breathing. Elias looked at her. "You've come far," he said. She gave a soft smile. "I didn't do it alone." They stared at the stars as the night deepened, and then, softly, she said something he didn't expect. "I want to stay here." Elias asked. Laura nodded. "Not forever, but long enough to grow something. To make something mine." He nodded slowly. "I'll stay too," he said. She looked at him. "Unsure? You sure?" Elias leaned back, hands behind his head. "You think I dragged you across half the galaxy just to leave you now?" She laughed, real laugh, full of warmth. "No," she said, "but I had to ask." Days turned to weeks. Laura learned to cook simple meals. She fixed the ship's wiring, planted more vegetables. Sometimes she told stories to the local kids. From the colony, they called her Captain Star Eyes, and she never corrected them. One day, she found Elias working under the ship. She sat beside him and handed him a drink. "I've been thinking," she said. Elias took the drink, raised a brow. "Dangerous," he teased. She rolled her eyes, then said, "If I ever wanted a crew of my own, would you help me build it?" Elias didn't even pause. "Always," he said. The sun dipped below the green hills. Laura stood up, stretched, and looked out across the land. She was taller now, in size. But in presence, no chains, no commands. Only steps forward. Once, she was sold for nothing, thrown aside like trash. But now she was someone people listened to. Someone who had faced monsters and scars and still chose to live. She wasn't worthless. She was everything she was never allowed to be, and her journey had only just begun.